You just opened your eyes and congratulations, you're a bounty hunter. Another day where, let's be honest, there's a decent chance you end up fried, frozen, or face down on some planet because the bounty didn't go your way. In this video, we're diving deep into the criminal underworld of the Star Wars universe, imagining what it's really like to survive just one day out here. Spoiler, it's rough, so sit back, grab a warm drink or a snack and let the galaxy fade around you. And if you enjoy slow journeys through strange history, feel free to subscribe. Now, let's begin. The Outer Rim, a place where the galaxy feels wide open, untamed and dangerous. If the core worlds are polished halls filled with senators, bureaucrats, and endless debates, then the Rim is the opposite. Dusty, rugged, and full of people who don't care about politics, as long as they can make their next score. Out here, you're on the edge of known space. Hyperlanes stretch thin, planets can go years without real oversight, and entire systems slip through the cracks of galactic control. That lack of order is exactly what makes the Outer Rim the perfect breeding ground for smugglers, gangsters, warlords, and of course, bounty hunters. For most people born in the core, the Rim is a scary rumor. They picture Hutt gangsters ruling over slaves, pirates waiting outside trade routes, and mercenaries gunning each other down in cantinas. And to be fair, that's not far off. The Republic rarely reached this far during its height, except when it needed resources. Even when the Jedi stepped in, it was usually after things had already gotten messy. Later, when the Empire rose, the Outer Rim was still mostly ignored. They had stormtroopers stationed at key ports and outposts, sure, but the real power remained in the hands of local syndicates and crime families. So when the law doesn't stretch this far, people turn to other means of justice. Sometimes that means buying protection from a Hutt, and sometimes that means hiring a bounty hunter to solve a problem. What's strange is how the Rim developed its own ecosystem of survival. Out here, everything is transactional. Credits talk louder than loyalty. You could meet someone one day who buys you a drink, then see them the next day collecting a bounty on your head. That instability is terrifying for most, but for hunters, it's opportunity. Every smuggler on the run, every pirate king ruling a dustball of a planet, every debt unpaid, all of it turns into contracts. The Rim is basically an open market for those willing to chase marks. Think of the Outer Rim as the galaxy's Wild West, except instead of dusty revolvers and saloons, it's thermal detonators and cantinas packed with aliens from every corner of the stars. Walk into a place like Mos Eisley and you'll feel it instantly. Everyone's carrying a weapon, everyone's watching their back, and everyone is willing to sell someone else out if the price is right. For a bounty hunter, this is paradise. It means you'll never go hungry as long as you've got a ship, a blaster, and the guts to follow through on a contract. The Hutts are probably the best example of how the Outer Rim runs itself. These slug-like crime lords don't rule with politics. They rule with power and fear. They own whole planets, control spice routes, and keep armies of mercenaries and hunters at their disposal. If a Hutt places a bounty, you know it's serious business, because their credits flow everywhere. Working for them is risky. Betray a Hutt, and you'll find yourself on the receiving end of a bounty so high that even your closest friends would consider turning you in. But if you survive, and if you deliver, you can make more money in a single Hutt job than most people will see in their lifetime. But the Hutts aren't alone. The Black Sun Syndicate, the Pike family with their spice trade, and later Crimson Dawn, all carved out their own corners of the Rim. Each of them needs muscle, assassins, and hunters to keep rivals in line. And that's where you come in. A bounty hunter's life is shaped by these groups. Sometimes you're their tool, sometimes you're their enemy. And if you're smart, you find a way to play both sides without getting crushed in the middle. The Outer Rim also gives rise to smaller stranger powers. Warlords who rule entire systems like personal kingdoms. Pirate fleets that terrorize shipping lanes. Even Jedi outcasts and ex-Sith hiding from the galaxy sometimes end up here. It's a magnet for anyone who doesn't fit into the Republic or the Empire. That makes it chaotic, but also full of opportunity. The moment the authorities turn their back, someone fills the void. Usually someone with credits, and usually someone who needs problems solved the dirty way. For an outsider, the Rim might look like a place of constant danger. And in truth it is. If you're not tough enough to survive, you won't last long. But for someone with your skills, it's the perfect environment. You're not weighed down by endless regulations. You're not judged by a spotless record. Out here, results matter. Bring in a target, dead or alive, and no one cares how you did it. All that matters is that you got the job done. This is why bounty hunting thrives here. The Outer Rim is a place where people disappear, where debts pile up, where fugitives run to escape justice, and where every unresolved grudge turns into a contract. You'll find marks hiding in the deep swamps of Nal Hutta, trying to blend in on Nar Shaddaa's neon streets, or vanishing into the endless deserts of Tatooine. Each environment brings its own dangers, and each one requires a different approach, but they all share the same rule: the Rim belongs to those bold enough to take it. If the Outer Rim is the wild frontier of the galaxy, then certain planets act like its beating hearts. These hubs aren't random dust balls floating in space. They're gathering points where smugglers, criminals, mercenaries, and bounty hunters all cross paths. Each one has its own reputation, its own smell, its own dangers. To a core worlder, they all look like places you'd never want to visit. To a bounty hunter, though, they're your office, your market, and sometimes your battlefield. Let's start with Nar Shaddaa, the infamous smuggler's moon. Picture Coruscant, but stripped of all its glamour, hollowed out by corruption and left to rot. Towering cityscapes stretch as far as the eye can see, but here there are no senators or Jedi walking around. Instead, you've got neon signs buzzing in alien languages, cantinas stacked one on top of another, and endless levels where spice dealers, slicers, and mercenaries all do business. The Hutts technically run Nar Shaddaa, but in truth it's a free-for-all. Every syndicate has a presence, and every hunter eventually winds up here. Need gear? Nar Shaddaa has black market shops, where you can buy anything from a custom blaster to a starship mod. Need information? Every cantina is crawling with informants, as long as you can pay. And if you're looking for work, this is the place. The Smuggler's Moon never sleeps, which means contracts are always moving. This is where new hunters cut their teeth. If you can survive its streets, dodge the gangs, and manage to bring back a target alive, then you're on your way to building a real reputation. At the same time, it's easy to disappear here. A hunter who burns too many bridges, or a mark desperate enough, can vanish into the lower levels and never be seen again. For you, Nar Shaddaa becomes both opportunity and trap. Every time you land there, you know you're gambling with your life. Then there's Tatooine, the desert world that refuses to die. From space, it looks like nothing but sand and rock. No one with sense would want to live here, and yet it's one of the most notorious planets in the Rim. That's because Tatooine is Hutt territory. Mos Espa, Mos Eisley, all those little towns and spaceports are basically staging grounds for spice shipments, smuggling rings, and slave trade. Hunters find work here constantly, whether it's collecting debts for the Hutts, chasing down runaways, or catching smugglers who thought they could cheat their employers. If you're looking for a place to lie low after a messy job, hiding out in the Dune Sea, or bribing your way into Jabba's palace can keep you safe, at least for a while. But the desert doesn't forgive weakness. Sandstorms, Tusken raiders, and the sheer emptiness of the place make it just as dangerous as the criminals who live there. More than a few hunters have died in the wastes, lost to the heat before their marks even fired a shot. Now, if you want a place where hunters constantly cross paths, look at Ord Mantell. This planet is practically built on bounty work. The urban sprawls there are messy and industrial, filled with scrapyards, gambling halls, and endless criminal gangs. The junk markets are legendary. You can find ships patched together from 10 different models, or droids rebuilt from battlefield leftovers. For hunters, Ord Mantell is a place where contracts pile up faster than you can accept them. Smugglers ditch cargo there all the time, gangs fight each other constantly, and the locals are always willing to pay someone to make a rival disappear. If Nar Shaddaa is the galaxy's black market capital, then Ord Mantell is its scrapyard arena. You'll find yourself coming back here again and again, whether for work or repairs. Beyond these big names, there are dozens of smaller hubs that matter just as much to a bounty hunter's life. Florum, for instance, was once the hideout of Hondo Ohnaka's pirate gang, a dusty, forgotten planet, yet filled with enough crime to keep dozens of hunters busy. Nal Hutta, the Hutt homeworld, is a swampy nightmare, but being close to the Hutt's power base means there's always a price on someone's head. And then there's Ryloth, the Twi'lek homeworld, where endless conflict and slave raids keep hunters supplied with contracts, whether from desperate locals or the syndicates exploiting them. Each of these worlds teaches you something different. Nar Shaddaa teaches you how to watch your back in a crowded city where every stranger might be a rival. Tatooine teaches you endurance, surviving heat, sand, and a crime culture built around the Hutts. Ord Mantell teaches you that chaos breeds opportunity, and that sometimes a broken-down ship can be worth more than a polished one. These planets become like classrooms for bounty hunters, shaping your skills and sharpening your instincts. When you think of bounty hunters in Star Wars, the first name that usually comes to mind is Boba Fett. But before Boba became a legend, there was Jango Fett, the man whose face would become the blueprint for an entire army. His story begins long before the Clone Wars, rooted in the fractured world of Mandalore, where survival often came down to loyalty, skill, and how fast you could pull a blaster from your hip. Jango was born around 66 years before the Battle of Yavin, in a period when Mandalorian culture was still dealing with endless wars, clan rivalries, and shifting loyalties. Depending on who you ask, Jango's childhood is either the story of a survivor or the story of a boy caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was raised among the true Mandalorians, a faction led by Jasta Mareel. These were not the radical Death Watch types who wanted Mandalore to thrive on endless conflict. The true Mandalorians believed in a code of honor, not peace-loving pacifism, but a disciplined warrior's path. For young Jango, this was the closest thing to a family. But Mandalorian life was rarely stable. Conflict with the rival Death Watch eventually boiled over, and Jango's world was thrown into chaos. Death Watch ambushed the true Mandalorians, massacring them. Jango was still a child when he lost nearly everyone he knew. The tragedy hardened him, but it didn't break him. Instead, he grew under the guidance of Jasta Mareel and later Montrose, learning how to fight, track, and command. These years forged him into someone who understood not only combat, but also loyalty and betrayal. After Jasta's death, Jango rose to command what was left of the true Mandalorians. Imagine being in your 20s and suddenly leading battle-hardened warriors. That was Jango's reality. He had already earned scars, already survived betrayals, and already learned that victory often depended on planning as much as skill with a blaster. His life took another brutal turn when the Jedi entered the picture. During one of the clashes between the true Mandalorians and the Death Watch, the Jedi were called in. Instead of siding with Jango's disciplined faction, they helped Death Watch. Jango was captured, enslaved, and sold off to harsh labor on a spice world. Most people would have died there, but Jango used the experience to sharpen his resolve. He escaped, armed himself, and returned to the galaxy with a hunger to carve his own path. This marked the true beginning of his career as a bounty hunter. Freed from the burden of leading an entire Mandalorian faction, Jango turned his focus to personal survival and reputation. He built his arsenal piece by piece, a pair of Westar 34 blaster pistols, Mandalorian armor that became his signature look, and an iconic ship. Everything about him was practical, efficient, and deadly. Over time, Jango's name spread across the galaxy. He wasn't known for unnecessary cruelty, but for precision. If someone hired Jango Fett, they could count on the job being done. He worked for crime syndicates, planetary governments, and anyone with the credits to pay. He wasn't picky about politics. What mattered was survival and reputation. That was the unspoken code of bounty hunters. You didn't need to care who ruled the galaxy, as long as you got paid. What made Jango stand out wasn't only his Mandalorian training or his weapons, it was his ability to think. Many hunters were little more than muscle with blasters, but Jango could strategize. He was a tactician, someone who could read the battlefield and adjust instantly. He could duel a Jedi and walk away alive, which was almost unheard of. At this point in his life, Jango Fett was already more than a bounty hunter. He was the best of his era, respected, feared, and envied. Every scar on his armor, every modification to his ship, every credit in his account told the story of a man who had risen from war-torn Mandalore through betrayal and slavery to stand as the most effective hunter in the galaxy. Jango Fett's career could have ended with him being remembered as the sharpest shot and most feared hunter of his era. That would have been enough to secure his place in the underworld's history, but his decision to accept Count Dooku's offer and become the genetic source for the Grand Army of the Republic turned him into something else entirely. His legacy stopped being personal, and instead it became galactic. The Kaminoans needed a template for their army, a warrior whose instincts, physiology, and resilience could be multiplied millions of times without degrading in quality. Out of the countless mercenaries and soldiers in the galaxy, Jango Fett was selected. He didn't hesitate to treat the opportunity as a contract. He negotiated with the Kaminoans, and he was careful about the terms. The payment was vast, enough credits to guarantee comfort for the rest of his life. But Jango wanted something far more personal than wealth. He asked for one unaltered clone, one that would grow naturally, without the genetic accelerations or mental programming that the rest of the army would receive. That clone would be his son. He named him Boba. In that choice, Jango showed a side of himself that complicates how people remember him. On one hand, he was a ruthless bounty hunter who sold his DNA for war. On the other, he was a father who wanted a legacy he could raise with his own hands, not one that was mass-produced and conditioned by others. Boba wasn't an experiment to Jango. He was family. Meanwhile, the clone army, being built on Kamino, was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Millions of soldiers, each carrying Jango's face, his strength, his instincts. They were programmed for loyalty to the Republic, trained to fight with coordination and discipline. To the Jedi and the Senate, the clones looked like a miracle, a perfectly timed solution to the separatist threat. To Jango, they were little more than part of the deal. He trained some of them personally, showing them skills beyond the Kaminoan regimen, but he didn't see himself as their father. His focus was on Boba. Still, you can't ignore what those clones meant. Every victory of the Republic during the Clone Wars carried Jango's fingerprints. Every blaster fired, every soldier marching in lockstep, every order carried out was made possible because his DNA had been replicated millions of times. Whether he cared or not, Jango had shaped the course of galactic history. His influence didn't last long into the war itself. During the Battle of Geonosis, the very first major clash between Jedi and Separatists, Jango's life came to a sudden end. On the sandy arena floor, he faced Jedi Master Mace Windu. For all his skill, Jango had been worn down by earlier fighting, his jetpack was damaged, and against one of the Order's greatest duelists, he was overwhelmed. One strike ended him. To many, it seemed like the story of Jango Fett closed there, buried in the dust of Geonosis. But his legacy only grew after his death. His son Boba carried on his name, training himself to be every bit as dangerous as his father. The clone troopers went on to fight across the galaxy, changing the balance of power in every theatre of the war. When the clones turned their blasters on the Jedi, Jango's influence reached its darkest point. Millions of Jedi deaths, the fall of the Republic, the rise of the Empire, all of it tied back to the decision Jango made when he agreed to be the template. There's a strange irony in it. Jango never set out to be a revolutionary. He wasn't driven by politics, and he didn't serve a higher cause. He wanted money, survival, and a son. Yet the ripple effects of his deal with Dooku changed the galaxy more than most senators, Jedi, or Sith could ever claim. You can argue that without Jango Fett, there is no Clone Wars, no Empire, no Darth Vader, commanding legions of soldiers who all carry the same face. What makes Jango's legacy fascinating is that it lives on in two completely different ways. On one hand, you have Boba Fett, the singular heir who became his own kind of legend, feared, respected, and remembered long after the galaxy moved on. On the other hand, you have the countless soldiers who lived, fought, and died carrying Jango's bloodline. For most of them, their lives were short and brutal, cut off before they could ever explore what it meant to be more than soldiers. Yet every one of them was, in essence, a fragment of Jango. In the underworld, bounty hunters still speak of him as the professional standard, the man who never overplayed his hand, who knew when to push and when to disappear, who turned Mandalorian skills into a profitable career. In military records, his name is tied to the birth of the most effective fighting force the galaxy had ever seen. And in Boba's life, Jango is remembered as a father who gave him armor, training, and the drive to survive in a cruel galaxy. Growing up, your world never promised comfort. Every day was a negotiation with survival. Some of you were born into cramped apartments, stacked over seedy saloons, the air heavy with smoke, and the faint scent of overheating machinery. Others came from dusty streets on planets where the sun was relentless, sandstorms common, and law enforcement mostly a rumor. Hunger, scarcity, and the need to outwit the stronger dictated the rhythm of your early life. From a young age, you learned the value of observation. Watching patterns, memorizing routines, and noticing small tells in behavior became second nature. You noticed who tipped their hand too quickly, who walked with confidence, and who avoided trouble when it arrived. In a place where every transaction could be a trap, these skills were essential. Some of you had family, though not always the kind that nurtured. Survival often meant being resourceful without guidance. You scavenged what you could, from discarded tech pieces to half-broken weapons, learning to repair them, adapt them, and use them if necessary. On worlds with high crime rates, small-time theft and street-level hustles became part of your curriculum. A blaster stolen at 12 might save your life at 14. A slip of the tongue in the wrong cantina could land you in a debt you couldn't pay without risking your fingers. The environment molded your instincts. In tight alleys and crowded markets, you learned to move unseen, to vanish into shadows when needed. Some of you took to climbing, jumping, and running in ways that amazed even older kids. You learned that speed and agility often mattered more than brute strength, and that sometimes cleverness was deadlier than any weapon. Education wasn't guaranteed. If you were lucky, you found old datapads or holobooks in abandoned workshops. History, galactic politics, and technical manuals became private lessons. You read them for survival, piecing together knowledge of the galaxy so you could anticipate movements, predict trade routes, and understand potential targets before anyone else. Information could be as valuable as a blaster, especially when negotiating a deal or avoiding a trap. Recruitment into early crime rings or underground work was common. Some of you were approached by local gang leaders, mercenaries, or minor bounty hunters who noticed your skills. They offered mentorship, training, and importantly, access to tools and credits. In exchange, you learned the rules of the street: observe, adapt, survive, and always plan one step ahead. Lessons came hard and often carried a sting. For those who didn't join gangs, life on harsh worlds still taught lessons. You might have been part of a scavenger crew in asteroid belts, salvaging derelict freighters, dodging pirates, or trading scraps for rations. You learned about stealth, timing, and negotiation. A missed calculation could leave you stranded in space with nothing but a flickering life support unit and a small pack of credits that wouldn't last long. These experiences built resilience and patience, qualities that would define your career. Survival skills expanded beyond physical abilities. You learned to read the behavior of creatures, from the small rodents in kitchens to larger territorial predators on frontier planets. Predicting movement, understanding aggression, and avoiding danger became almost instinctive. You also picked up psychological insight. Understanding fear, desire, and hesitation allowed you to manipulate situations, convincing a target to walk into a trap or a client to raise the credits for a job. Family, mentors, and friends came and went, often lost to violence, betrayal, or opportunity. Each loss hardened you, but also sharpened your understanding of the galaxy's realities. You realized early that trust needed balance, enough to survive, but never enough to be caught unprepared. Life was transactional, loyalty was earned slowly, and your next opportunity might depend on how carefully you had observed the world around you. Your environment taught improvisation. Makeshift weapons, jury-rigged armor, and stolen tech became common tools in your arsenal. A broken droid arm could be repurposed into a blaster mount. Old fuel cells might power a grenade. Ingenuity became a survival habit, and with practice, those habits evolved into tactical skills. You began experimenting with speed, distraction, and planning, crafting strategies that would later define your hunts. By the time you reached adulthood, you were no stranger to hardship. You understood credits, contracts, and consequences. The first hunts started small. You tracked minor criminals, fugitives wanted for debts, or petty crimes. These early targets weren't the high-profile syndicate bosses or notorious smugglers you'd one day chase. They were individuals who underestimated you, or whose overconfidence made them predictable. Every hunt taught timing, observation, and patience. You discovered the value of preparation and the quiet satisfaction of planning a pursuit so well that the target never realized they were being followed until the end. Mistakes were unavoidable. Your first misjudged step might have caused a fugitive to escape or triggered a firefight that left you bruised, burned, or bleeding. Early failures forced you to adapt quickly. Every misstep highlighted a gap in knowledge or skill. Some lessons were painfully literal, like learning which rooftops were unstable or how far a laser blast could ricochet in a crowded market. Others were subtler, revealing the nuances of negotiation, intimidation, and timing. How bounties were listed, how contracts were assigned, and how the flow of credits worked. The Galactic Bounty Network was surprisingly organized. Guilds monitored contracts closely, tracking hunters' reliability, skill, and adherence to agreements. Breaking a contract, missing a target, or damaging property unnecessarily could reduce future opportunities. Discipline mattered, even for someone who spent more time outside the law than inside it. The moment you officially stepped into the trade, you realized how much the profession demanded. Early jobs often involved multi-layered negotiations. Some clients wanted discretion, others demanded speed. Some promised generous payments, but offered little information. You had to weigh risk against reward constantly. Picking the wrong job or misjudging the difficulty could leave you stranded, in debt, or worse. Equipment upgrades came gradually. As credits accumulated, you invested in personal protection and tools that increased efficiency and survival. A better blaster, reinforced armor, or a tracking device became essential. Every addition enhanced your capability, but also increased the expectations placed upon you. Clients noticed improvements in skill and equipment, and soon your reputation and resources were intertwined. The first time you faced a dangerous target, adrenaline was clinical. You understood that hesitation could be fatal, that every choice could determine survival. Networking also began to matter. Meeting other hunters, sharing tips, and sometimes forming temporary alliances offered safety and advantage. Early collaborations were tentative. Trust existed only as far as necessity required, but you began learning how to read people, how to gauge reliability, and how to manipulate situations without exposing yourself. A conversation over a drink in a shadowed cantina could lead to critical intelligence on a target, a better route through a city, or even access to a rare weapon. You discovered the subtle rules of survival in the underworld. Credits had to be managed carefully. Overextending resources could compromise hunts. Choosing jobs that didn't align with your skill set could be disastrous. The galaxy rewarded preparation, adaptability, and patience more than raw aggression. A well-timed ambush or a carefully observed stakeout often brought better results than reckless action. Every early success brought confidence. Every failure brought humility. By the time you handled your first moderately high-profile contract, you had built a foundation of practical knowledge, how to move unseen, anticipate threats, improvise when plans failed, and use every tool at your disposal. You understood the value of discretion, precision, and timing. You had learned that sometimes the best weapon was patience, the quiet observation that allowed you to strike at the exact right moment. Stepping fully into the role of a bounty hunter meant accepting a lifestyle. Nights spent in cantinas waiting for leads, days spent tracking rumors, and the constant awareness of danger became normal. The galaxy didn't offer a schedule, holidays, or guarantees. Every contract had risk, every target was unpredictable, and every decision could have lasting consequences. The life you were entering demanded resilience, skill, and a willingness to act decisively when necessary. By the end of your rookie period, you were no longer just a street-smart kid or a scavenger. You had begun crafting a professional identity. The transition from survival in harsh worlds to survival in the galaxy's underworld had been gradual but deliberate. Bounty hunter guilds were central to your system, not as a bureaucracy, but as a network that kept things running smoothly and sometimes violently. Joining a guild wasn't mandatory, but it provided protection, access to information, and importantly, legitimacy in a world that often dismissed freelancers. Without connections, you risked being ignored by clients, or worse, targeted by rival hunters without consequence. Guilds maintained lists of available bounties, circulating contracts with different levels of danger, reward, and visibility. Some contracts were straightforward: capture a smuggler, deliver a fugitive, recover stolen goods. Others were complex, involving multi-layered infiltration, political sensitivity, or high-profile clients, who insisted on discretion. The guild's database kept track of hunters' previous work, adherence to contracts, and reputation for reliability. A history of failure or unnecessary collateral damage could mean losing access to lucrative jobs, while consistent efficiency often led to higher-paying opportunities and whispered recognition among peers. The flow of credits followed clear rules. Bounties were often offered with partial advance payment, and the remainder upon delivery or proof of completion. Sometimes payment came in goods rather than credits, fuel cells, rare weapon components, or even starship upgrades. Learning to negotiate was essential. Too low a price, and you might be working hours for nothing. Too high, and clients might look elsewhere. Over time, you learn to read contracts like texts, deciphering the implied risks, hidden clauses, and occasionally the traps. Survival in this business depended on understanding both the clients and the competition. Every contract attracted other hunters, some desperate, some experienced. Early on, you learned how to gauge the difficulty of a hunt not only by the bounty description, but by considering who else might be after the same target. Guilds enforced rules, though enforcement was selective and often brutal. Breaking a contract, harming innocent bystanders unnecessarily, or violating guild protocols could result in fines, suspension, or being blacklisted entirely. Some guilds had internal enforcers or contract killers to remind hunters of their obligations. Reputation carried weight. A hunter who acted recklessly found opportunities shrinking, while one who delivered efficiently and discreetly could see contracts lining up. Over time, clients came to recognize reliability and discretion. Syndicates, independent traders, and even planetary authorities occasionally requested specific hunters by name. These requests weren't casual. They reflected trust earned over countless small victories and careful handling of sensitive situations. Your name began to carry weight, whispered among contacts, as someone capable of completing difficult jobs without unnecessary complications. It wasn't fame in the traditional sense, but in the underworld, it mattered more than reputation on any civilized planet. Guilds also offered training opportunities, albeit informal. Experienced hunters shared tactics, sometimes for a fee, sometimes as part of mentorships. Lessons ranged from marksmanship and stealth techniques to negotiation strategies, data analysis, and understanding alien psychology. Observing others in the field provided insights you couldn't glean from books or simulations. Every tip, every piece of advice, and every cautionary tale became part of your personal playbook. Networking within guilds proved as valuable as any weapon. By following guild rules, consistently completing contracts, and gradually expanding your network, you began to carve out a name for yourself. Early recognition mattered less than steady accumulation of experience, but each successful job added to the perception of skill and reliability. Word spread slowly, sometimes deliberately muted to protect sources and methods, but always noticeable to those paying attention. Soon the galaxy started recognizing your presence. Minor syndicates preferred your services, planetary authorities occasionally approved your actions, and other hunters acknowledged your growing skill. Your name became a factor in negotiations and encounters. Competitors watched you, clients sought you, and the guild noted your rising reputation. Each contract completed built a foundation that would support increasingly difficult assignments, leading to more complex and high-stakes hunts. Your professional identity began to solidify. Every mission expanded your understanding of the galaxy's underworld. As your reputation began to take shape, the stakes rose alongside it. A failed pursuit could mean nothing more than embarrassment, but it could also leave you wounded, exposed, or indebted to the wrong people. Your first serious failure probably stung more than any physical injury. Perhaps a target slipped through your fingers because you underestimated their allies or overestimated your own resources. Maybe an ambush went wrong, turning the hunter into the hunted for a brief, disorienting moment. Each mistake left marks. Scars on your body, yes, but also subtle lessons in judgment and strategy. The galaxy has a long memory, and so do the people in it. Double crosses became part of the education. Clients sometimes misrepresented their targets, hiding motives or exaggerating threats. Other hunters could interfere, either through rivalry, opportunism, or underhanded deals. An unprepared rookie could be trapped in a sting operation or left to face an ambush alone. Over time, you developed a healthy skepticism, balancing trust with caution. The first scars carried stories. A burn from an overheated blaster, a cut from a vibroblade, or a bruised rib from a heavy landing reminded you that every job demanded respect for risk. You began to understand the importance of defensive tactics, situational awareness, and retreat options. Retreat was not failure, it was strategy. Knowing when to disengage could preserve your life, your reputation, and your resources for the next hunt. Every early contract introduced elements that shaped your approach to future work. You learned that the galaxy's rules were fluid. Sometimes a minor oversight could escalate into a firefight. Other times, a small gesture of cunning or diplomacy could secure the outcome without a shot fired. Rival hunters began to notice you, some with envy, others with curiosity. Encounters with experienced competitors became opportunities to test your skills, but also occasions for danger. Each interaction revealed where you needed improvement and how to anticipate strategies you hadn't encountered before. Collisions with criminal organizations reinforced the importance of discretion and negotiation. Even minor mistakes could anger syndicates, drawing unwanted attention or retaliation. You learned to identify threats before they fully materialized, to gauge when to push forward and when to withdraw. These early encounters emphasized that physical skill alone wouldn't carry you. Intelligence, adaptability, and careful timing were equally critical. Some lessons arrived through unconventional means. Observing others' mistakes, scavenging abandoned tech, provided insights you couldn't gain on the job. Patterns became clear. Certain syndicates favored particular tactics. Specific clients always had hidden clauses, and rival hunters followed predictable routines. Over time, this awareness allowed you to anticipate problems before they escalated, making you more efficient and safer on assignments. Your reputation began to solidify with each successful hunt, but it was fragile. Maintaining reliability became as important as honing combat skills. Word of mouth in the guild system spread faster than any hollow message. Demonstrating skill, efficiency, and discretion built respect. Showing carelessness or overconfidence brought scrutiny and potential danger. Over time, your early scars and missteps became part of your story. They shaped your instincts, informed your strategies, and earned you cautious respect from peers. Rival hunters started measuring you differently. Syndicates and clients began to see reliability in your name. Those experiences, failures, betrayals, and first victories formed the foundation of the reputation you carried into higher stakes work. By the end of these formative years, your identity as a bounty hunter was clear. You had learned the rules, discovered your limits, and honed your instincts. The galaxy's underworld, with its constant threats, shifting alliances, and subtle hierarchies, was no longer alien. It was your arena. The early risks, though challenging, had prepared you for the next stage of your life, commanding contracts, navigating politics, and beginning to leave a mark that other hunters would recognize and respect. A bounty hunter is only as effective as the tools they bring into the field. Your arsenal became an extension of your instincts. Each piece chosen for a specific purpose, each tool integrated into the way you approached a hunt. Blasters remained the most common weapon, but not all were created equal. You learned the nuances of different models: short-range pistols for quick ambushes, long-barrel rifles for precision shooting, and heavy, repeating blasters for situations that required firepower over subtlety. You became intimately familiar with recoil, heat management, and maintenance. Knowing how your blaster responded under pressure was crucial, because a jammed weapon at the wrong moment could be catastrophic. Vibroblades offered a different approach. They demanded close contact, precision, and timing. Unlike a blaster, a vibroblade required patience and understanding of the opponent's movements. You practiced constantly, testing angles, speeds, and techniques. In confined spaces or situations where discretion was essential, these blades became indispensable. Some hunters personalized them, adding grips, weighted handles, or energy fields to increase lethality. Gadgets expanded your versatility. Grappling hooks, stun nets, and magnetic cuffs allowed you to immobilize targets without lethal force. Smoke dispensers, holographic projectors, and sound emitters provided distractions or concealment. Remote sensors and tracking beacons offered information about a target's location and movement, turning seemingly impossible pursuits into manageable operations. Using these tools required more than technical knowledge. You needed timing, creativity, and intuition. Improper deployment could alert your target or compromise a mission. Jetpacks redefined mobility. Being able to move vertically, reach rooftops, or escape tight situations provided a strategic advantage. Maneuvering in 3 dimensions required practice and awareness. The first flights were often clumsy. Imbalances, miscalculations, and hard landings were common, but mastery added a dynamic edge to your hunts. A hunter who could appear where no one expected or disappear into shadows with a quick burst of thrust became a force to be reckoned with. Some hunters favoured specialised weaponry, flamethrowers, electroprods, or sonic disruptors. Each had situational uses, often designed for crowd control, area denial, or exploiting environmental weaknesses. You learned to evaluate when to deploy these tools and when restraint served better. Over-reliance could compromise efficiency or draw attention, while careful application often secured an edge without unnecessary risk. Protective gear evolved alongside weapons. Armor wasn't only for absorbing blaster bolts, it became a platform for your arsenal. Holsters, mounts, and integrated systems allowed for quick access to multiple tools. Concealed compartments held secondary weapons, grenades, or tracking devices. Modular armor permitted adjustments based on mission type, lighter for stealth, heavier for direct confrontation. The relationship between armor and weaponry became instinctive. The layout, weight, and ergonomics influenced your movements, reactions, and tactics. Mandalorian hunters introduced a level of sophistication that redefined the concept of the arsenal. Wrist gauntlets housed flamethrowers, grappling lines, and mini rocket launchers. Wrist-mounted darts and tasers offered discrete options for subduing targets. The integration of multiple tools into a single wearable system reduced reaction time and increased efficiency. Studying their approach gave you insights into combining gear, training, and instinct into a seamless operation. Energy shields and personal deflectors became considerations for high-risk targets, while bulky early models restricted movement. Later compact versions allowed you to balance protection with agility. The decision to use one depended on mission parameters, the target's abilities, and the environment. Deploying a shield at the wrong moment could reveal position or slow mobility, but timing it correctly offered critical seconds in life or death encounters. Grenades and explosives added another layer to your repertoire. Thermal detonators, concussion charges, and EMP devices provided options to disable vehicles, flush targets from cover, or create chaos to your advantage. You learned to calculate blast radius, consider collateral damage, and deploy them with precision. Improper use could backfire spectacularly, but mastery allowed you to shape the battlefield according to your strategy. Tech integration became increasingly important. Holomaps, communication scramblers, and remote surveillance drones extended your awareness beyond the immediate environment. A small scout droid could navigate narrow corridors, transmit visual data, or distract guards, allowing you to position yourself optimally. Signal jammers, hacking tools, and encrypted communication devices ensured operational security in a galaxy where information could be as deadly as any blaster. Maintenance became a constant responsibility. Weapons jammed, gadgets failed, and armor sustained damage. You learned to repair, modify, and improvise in the field, often with limited resources. A quick adjustment to a blaster's cooling system or a field repair of a vibroblade edge could mean the difference between success and failure. These skills, honed over countless missions, turned gear from simple tools into reliable extensions of your abilities. Your ship was more than transportation. It was your base of operations, a mobile home, and sometimes your only sanctuary. The right starship could make a hunt possible or impossible, giving you speed, firepower, and concealment when you needed it most. Early in your career, you might have scraped together a used shuttle or stolen freighter, but as you gained reputation and credits, your options expanded. The Firespray class, made famous by Boba Fett, offered versatility. Its compact frame allowed it to navigate urban environments, asteroid belts, or crowded docking bays with relative ease. Twin engines provided bursts of speed, while maneuvering thrusters gave precise control in tight situations. Interior space was modest but functional, accommodating weapon storage, life support systems, and your armor. Some hunters added hidden compartments for sensitive cargo or captured targets. The fire spray became a reliable platform, able to handle both solo operations and coordinated hunts. The Slave One, a unique ship associated with Jango and later Boba Fett, embodied stealth and firepower. Its design allowed for unconventional flight patterns and vertical takeoff, letting you approach targets from angles they rarely anticipated. Weapon systems were integrated with targeting arrays, and shields offered protection against both pursuit and environmental hazards. Flying Slave Y was more than piloting. It was a tactical advantage, allowing you to strike with precision and retreat before anyone could respond effectively. Pursuer-class ships catered to more specialized needs. Agile and heavily armed, they favored hunters who anticipated high-risk engagements or operated in contested space. Speed, durability, and advanced sensors made tracking elusive targets feasible. While larger than some other models, their modularity allowed customization. Additional weapon mounts, reinforced hulls, or stealth systems. Choosing a Pursuer-class ship often signaled that you were confident in both piloting skill and your ability to take on complex contracts. Customization was part of the equation. A stock ship rarely matched the demands of a seasoned hunter. Modifications included enhanced sensors for long-range tracking, reinforced hulls for firefights, and concealed compartments for discreet transport of targets or equipment. Navigation systems were upgraded to handle asteroid fields, planetary rings, and uncharted hyperspace routes. Some hunters added personal touches, holo projectors, to communicate with clients, droid assistance for repairs or reconnaissance, or integrated weapon control linked to armor systems. Life aboard the ship shaped your daily habits. Sleep cycles were dictated by contracts, star lanes, and fuel management. Maintenance routines were ritualized, checking engines, recalibrating sensors, cleaning weapons, and testing life support. A neglected system could jeopardize a hunt or strand you far from assistance. Over time, these routines became automatic, forming a rhythm that balanced efficiency with survival. Ships also represented identity. The design, color, and modifications became an extension of your presence in the galaxy. Other hunters recognized your vessel before your face or armor. Clients judged professionalism by the state of your ship. A clean, well-maintained vessel suggested reliability, while a patchwork craft implied improvisation, skill, or desperation. Each ship reflected your priorities, experience, and approach to the hunt. A mobile armory allowed flexibility in combat. Weapon lockers, spare parts, and drones were arranged to be accessible at a moment's notice. Some hunters installed retractable turrets, missile launchers, or automated defense systems to prepare for ambushes or high-risk extractions. These systems didn't replace skill, they enhanced it. Proper coordination between ship and hunter increased the chances of mission success while minimizing personal risk. Long-term survival depended on adaptability. Space wasn't forgiving. Piracy, Imperial patrols, environmental hazards, and mechanical failure were constant threats. Knowledge of repairs, fuel sources, and safe landing spots could determine whether a ship saved you or became a tomb. Hunters learned to improvise, using spare parts, scavenged tech, or local resources to keep ships operational. Flexibility became a survival habit, just as important as aim or combat strategy. Your ship often became a personal refuge. Amid the galaxy's chaos, it was a space you controlled, offering privacy, security, and perspective. It stored memories of hunts, contracts, and journeys. The hum of engines, the flicker of instrument panels, and the subtle vibration of hyperdrive became familiar companions. In the galaxy of bounties, syndicates were both opportunity and obstacle. I mentioned them in the beginning of the video, but let's dig deeper now. They controlled information, territory, and resources. They determined who lived comfortably, who scraped by, and who disappeared. Working with a syndicate meant access to contracts, intel, and protection. Working against one often meant dodging bullets, ambushes, or the subtle threats of politics and reputation. The Hutts, sprawling across multiple systems, represented a combination of wealth, influence, and unpredictability. They were meticulous in their dealings, valuing reliability and results above all. Doing business with them required tact. A missed deadline or sloppy handling of a contract could quickly escalate into fines, forced labor, or worse. Observing their operations offered insights, networks of informants, controlled trade routes, and alliances with smaller criminal factions. Hunters who navigated Hutt networks successfully gained access to high-profile targets and lucrative rewards, but missteps were rarely forgiven. Black Sun was less centralized, more fragmented, yet equally dangerous. It thrived on mobility, deception, and strategic alliances. Unlike the Hutts, Black Sun often hired hunters to disrupt competitors or extract specific information. Their contracts sometimes required subtler approaches, negotiation, infiltration, or manipulation, rather than direct confrontation. Aligning with them meant understanding their fluid hierarchies, anticipating betrayals, and remaining adaptable. Many hunters found themselves balancing multiple clients, navigating intersecting interests, and walking the line between cooperation and survival. Crimson Dawn operated in the shadows, weaving influence across systems through subterfuge and strategic intimidation. Their contracts often involved politically sensitive targets, requiring discretion and skill. Hunters working with Crimson Dawn needed to anticipate contingencies, maintain operational security, and respect chains of command. Misreading a situation could trigger violent repercussions, but careful execution earned trust, repeated contracts, and increased reputation. The Pike Syndicate, known for spice trade operations, brought another layer of challenge. Their territory was often hazardous, protected by loyal enforcers and surveillance networks. Contracts frequently required both physical skill and environmental awareness. Operating in spice-rich regions demanded knowledge of local hazards, from volatile chemical plants to unpredictable security drones. Collaborating with the Pikes taught lessons about terrain, timing, and indirect confrontation. Sometimes avoiding conflict entirely was the most efficient approach. Competition among syndicates created additional complexity. A target under one organization's protection might be of interest to another. You learn to evaluate allegiances, anticipate conflicts, and act with precision to avoid entanglement in broader disputes. Understanding the subtle politics among syndicates became as important as understanding your target. Working with syndicates also provided informal support. Safe houses, repair stations, and contacts became available through relationships cultivated over time. While never guaranteed, these resources could make the difference between a manageable assignment and a near-disastrous encounter. Building trust involved small steps, completing side jobs, honoring agreements, and demonstrating reliability. Over time, hunters often found themselves part of syndicate networks without formal membership, navigating a balance of loyalty and independence. Retaliation was swift and often disproportionate. You learned to gauge risk, understand hierarchies, and maintain situational awareness in every interaction. Avoiding entanglement sometimes required patience, subterfuge, or temporary withdrawal from a situation. The line between opportunity and danger was always narrow. Syndicates shaped careers as much as skills or weapons. They dictated who could access high-profile contracts, which systems offered lucrative opportunities, and which territories were too hazardous to enter alone. Early misjudgments could derail progress, while strategic navigation of syndicate politics accelerated reputation building. Hunter's success was intertwined with understanding and leveraging these networks. Another iconic figure in Star Wars and one of the best bounty hunters was Boba Fett. His story begins in tragedy, though he didn't know it as tragedy in the way most people would. Unlike the millions of clones being trained to become soldiers, Boba was unaltered, allowed to grow at a normal pace. He was given his father's attention, guidance, and the sense that one day he would inherit not only his armor, but his profession. That dream shattered in the Geonosian arena when Mace Windu's lightsaber cut Jango's life short. Boba was left standing in the middle of a galaxy that saw him as both a boy and a legacy. He was too young to carry on Jango's work, but too marked by loss to have a normal childhood. The clones around him were brothers in face but strangers in destiny. Unlike them, Boba had no commanding officer to report to, no battle training schedule to follow. He had something else. A father's armor, a father's reputation, and a burning need to survive. That survival started rough. As a boy, Boba fell in with other bounty hunters, trying to find his footing in the trade while still carrying the raw wound of loss. He carried Jango's helmet like a relic, and he carried his anger toward Mace Windu like a purpose. Revenge was his first real goal. He tried to kill Windu, assembling hunters like Aurra Sing and Bossk to help him strike back at the Jedi. The plans failed, but failure didn't stop him. Even as a teenager, Boba learned the same lesson his father had lived by. The galaxy won't hand you justice. You either carve out your place or you disappear. By the time Boba reached adulthood, the boy with the helmet had become a professional in his own right. He took contracts, built a name, and gradually developed his own style of hunting. He wasn't Jango's shadow anymore. He was his own figure, feared for his precision and feared even more for his silence. Boba didn't brag about his kills, didn't leave a trail of showmanship. He arrived, captured or eliminated his target, and disappeared again. That approach made him perfect for the rise of the Empire. When Darth Vader looked across the galaxy for bounty hunters who could be trusted with delicate work, Boba Fett's name was high on the list. Vader valued efficiency, and that was what Boba delivered. One of the most famous examples is his pursuit of Han Solo. Hired to track down the smuggler after he slipped away from Imperial forces, Boba demonstrated what set him apart from his peers. While others chased ships through hyperspace blindly, Boba understood tactics. He predicted Solo's moves, anticipated the Falcon's tricks, and tracked him all the way to Bespin. It wasn't luck, it was skill. By the time Han was encased in carbonite, Boba Fett had cemented himself as the Empire's most trusted hunter. Vader might have commanded the soldiers of the Empire, but when he needed a single job done quietly and effectively, Boba was the one he called. His partnership with Jabba the Hutt also defined his prime years. Jabba's palace on Tatooine was a gathering place for all kinds of criminals, mercenaries, and syndicate leaders, and Boba Fett was right in the middle of it. He served as Jabba's enforcer and collector, a hunter who could drag in debtors, traitors, or rivals. For Jabba, having Boba at his side was like having a walking reminder of how dangerous it was to cross him. For Boba, working with Jabba meant steady credits and steady reputation. People spoke about the hunter in Mandalorian armor, who never missed, never hesitated, and never wasted time with chatter. That kind of reputation was its own currency. By then, Boba had surpassed Jango, not in skill, but in legend. Where Jango was respected among the guilds, Boba became a name feared by smugglers, mercenaries, and even rebel operatives. What makes Boba Fett's prime years interesting is how balanced his life looked on the surface. He wasn't tied to the politics of the rebellion or the Empire. He wasn't sworn to the Hutts, though he worked closely with them. He wasn't burdened with a crew or apprentices. He was a lone figure with a ship, a set of weapons, and a reputation strong enough to buy him safety in dangerous places. While stormtroopers fought across the galaxy and syndicates battled for territory, Boba kept his focus narrow, the contract at hand. That focus paid off. Han Solo delivered in carbonite. If there was ever a period where Boba Fett was at the peak of his career, this was it. Every bounty hunter in the galaxy either wanted to beat him, match him, or learn from him. Yet Boba didn't chase fame. He didn't seek leadership among the guilds. He didn't care about legacy. He hunted, got paid, and moved to the next job. Boba Fett's career seemed to end in the most humiliating way possible. After years of building a reputation as the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter, he was swallowed by the Sarlacc in the Great Pit of Carkoon. For anyone else, that would have been the final chapter. The Sarlacc didn't give second chances, or at least that was the belief. Slowly digested over 1,000 years, as the saying went. Inside the Sarlacc, survival was a nightmare. Acid burned through armor plates, heat choked the air, and the living creature's digestive system tried to consume anything it caught. Most would have given up. Boba didn't. He fought his way out, and when he finally emerged, he was hardly the armored bounty hunter we remembered. He was broken, his skin burned, his strength gone. The armor kept him alive, but once the Jawas stripped it away, he was just another dying man in the desert. He was captured by Tusken raiders, dragged through the sand, and thrown into their camp as little more than a prisoner. And instead of breaking him, that experience reshaped him. We'd always seen the Tuskens as faceless raiders, background noise in Star Wars. But through Fett's eyes, they became something else. These were survivors, hardened by the desert, living by strict codes. At first, Fett resisted. He tried escaping, he fought back. But slowly, through proving himself in combat, helping them fend off threats, and enduring their trials, he earned a place among them. And in return, they gave him something he'd never really had before: a tribe. That stretch of his life matters, because it's the first time we see Boba Fett building connections instead of just hunting targets. He learnt their ways, took part in their rituals, even crafted his own gaffy stick. For a man who had spent his whole life in armor, hiding behind a reputation, this was the first time he was truly accepted for who he was, scars and all. The Tuskens gave him purpose after the Sarlacc, and you can argue they gave him back his humanity. But as with everything in the galaxy, peace didn't last. The Tusken tribe that took him in was massacred. The Pikes, the syndicates, and the spice trade made sure of that. Fett lost the only family he had left, and that wound shaped everything that followed. He could have gone back to bounty hunting, but instead he decided to aim higher. He wasn't going to be a hired gun anymore. He wanted to sit at the table, control the game, and protect the place he now called home. That's what drove him back to Jabba's old palace. By the time Fett reclaimed his armor, with a little help from Din Djarin during the Mandalorians' adventures, he was ready to change his role in the galaxy. He walked right into the underworld power vacuum left after Jabba's death and Bib Fortuna's weak rule, and claimed the throne for himself. Jabba had crushed people through violence, keeping them in line through terror. Fett tried something else. He wanted respect. Now that's easier said than done in a place like Tatooine. Every syndicate and crime family saw him as vulnerable, too old, too scarred. The Pikes in particular thought they could steamroll him, but Fett, instead of playing the lone wolf, built a crew. Fennec Shand became his right hand, loyal and efficient. He recruited street gangs, cyber-modified kids with their shiny speeders, even a Wookiee gladiator named Black Chrysanthemum. It wasn't the army you'd expect, but it was his, and it reflected the new Fett, still tough, still ruthless when needed, but now willing to share the fight. And who could forget the rancor? Fett didn't keep one under the palace, like Jabba had. He bonded with it. It showed the way Fett thought differently about power. He wasn't above getting his hands dirty, and he wanted to inspire loyalty, not just fear. The climax of all this came when the Pikes tried to take over Mos Espa, and in the end, he won. That victory cemented him as the daimyo of Tatooine, not as Jabba's replacement, but as something new. He started as a boy, defined by his father's death. He became a hunter who built a myth larger than his own reality. He survived the kind of death no one escapes and came out with a new sense of purpose. Few bounty hunters ever lived long enough to even consider change. Boba Fett did. Boba Fett's story shows that even in a galaxy where survival usually means living from contract to contract, it's possible for someone to step beyond the hunt. He will always be remembered as the bounty hunter who could not be escaped, but his true legacy lies in the fact that he lived long enough to ask what came after the hunt, and to answer it in his own way. If you ever wanted to picture the Star Wars underworld in its purest form, you'd start with a man in a wide-brimmed hat, red eyes glowing under the shadow, voice carrying the dry bite of someone who's seen too many shootouts and lived through all of them. That man was Cad Bane, and for years he was the name you called if you needed a job done, when the Republic and the Jedi were too busy pretending their rules meant anything. He was from Duros stock, a species known for their skill as pilots and explorers. He carved his path with blasters, mercenary work, and a survival instinct that made him stand out in an era overflowing with killers for hire. By the time the Clone Wars hit full swing, Bane had already made his reputation clear. If you needed someone bold enough to walk into the Jedi Temple itself and make it out alive, you called him. And that's exactly what happened. The Republic thought its vaults were untouchable, guarded by the galaxy's most powerful peacekeepers. Bane treated the temple like a bank that forgot to lock its doors. With a carefully planned heist, aided by hired muscle and his gadgets, he infiltrated the Jedi's home turf and stole a holocron. That stunt alone cemented his reputation as the deadliest bounty hunter alive during the war. It wasn't luck. Bane studied his opponents the way a hunter studies prey. He didn't have force powers, but he always found a way to level the playing field. Jet boots, wrist gauntlets, cables, flamethrowers. If a Jedi could counter one trick, he had 3 more ready. You can almost imagine the frustration in the Jedi Council chambers. Here they were, spending their days fighting droid armies and Sith Lords, while some hat-wearing mercenary kept outsmarting them on Coruscant's doorstep. And he did it with swagger. One of his most famous moves was taking hostages at the Senate itself. While the Clone Wars raged across distant systems, Bane reminded the galaxy that danger could come straight to the Republic's heart. He held senators hostage, forced them to comply, and escaped with the kind of payout that made other hunters jealous. The man had style in the worst way possible. Then there were the duels. If you've seen Bane in action, you know he lived for the quick draw. His entire persona was built like an old frontier gunslinger. He didn't waste words, he didn't posture too much. He waited for the blink, the flinch, the single opening. Against clone troopers, mercenaries, and even Jedi, that draw was lethal. There are stories of him going toe-to-toe with Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, 2 of the Order's most skilled fighters, and managing to escape both alive. That says more than any tall tale could. But what made Bane dangerous wasn't only his skill with blasters, it was his brain. He could put together elaborate schemes that would make crime syndicates proud. Assassinations, kidnappings, heists. Bane was always several steps ahead. He knew when to fight, when to vanish, and when to let others take the fall. In fact, one of his trademarks was leaving chaos behind while he walked away richer. He wasn't a one-man show either. Throughout the Clone Wars, Bane worked with other hunters, Aurra Sing, Bossk, even a younger Boba Fett. He treated partnerships like tools, useful until they weren't. If you survived a job with Cad Bane, you counted yourself lucky, because loyalty wasn't his strong suit. He valued credits, survival, and his own reputation. Everything else was secondary. That reputation carried weight. Bane wasn't the kind of hunter you could bluff or outbid. Hutts hired him. Sith hired him. Politicians whispered his name. He was proof that even in a galaxy filled with Jedi and Sith, there was still room for a man with a steady hand, cold nerves, and an iron will. If you're wondering how he kept ahead of Jedi for so long, part of the answer is his tech. His wide-brimmed hat wasn't for style. Underneath, his breathing tubes were essential, keeping him alive against force choke attempts. He customized every part of his gear for the single purpose of fighting those who should have been unbeatable. It was like he built himself as the Jedi's countermeasure, and it worked. Time after time, Bane slipped through their grasp. And yet, despite all his fame, that's what made him different. Cad Bane was a professional. The galaxy was full of wars, politics, and shifting power. But for him, it always came down to the next job. Credits on the table, target in sight, blasters ready. You could say he was the perfect example of what happens when you mix brains, nerve, and a complete lack of hesitation. He didn't want to be your hero, and he definitely didn't care if you thought he was the villain. Cad Bane was Cad Bane, and that was enough to make him the top of the food chain during one of the most chaotic eras the galaxy had ever seen. By the time the Clone Wars ended, most of the galaxy assumed Cad Bane would either cash out rich or vanish into the shadows. But men like Bane don't walk away quietly. He thrived too long on being the sharpest shot in the room, and the galaxy kept giving him work. The Republic had fallen, the Empire had risen. Bane adapted like he always had. He didn't care who wore the crown, whether it was the Senate or the Emperor. Power changed hands, credits didn't. The Empire controlled the big contracts now, but crime syndicates still operated in the cracks, and Bane knew exactly how to slip between them. He worked with the Hutts, the Pikes, whoever could afford him, and though age began to creep in, he kept the same swagger. The wide-brimmed hat, the careful stare, the slow draw that could still outpace younger hands, it all remained. What did change was the competition. During the Clone Wars, Bane was the top predator, but after the rise of the Empire, a new generation of hunters started making names for themselves. Chief among them was Boba. Boba was young, ruthless, and carrying the same kind of determination Bane once had. For Cad Bane, it was like staring at his own reflection in a younger, sharper body. That's where their infamous rivalry began. The two crossed paths more than once. Bane saw potential in Fett. He even trained him in certain ways during the years following his father Jango's death. But mentorship was never his real interest. Cad Bane didn't groom successors. He measured rivals, and Boba Fett was shaping up to be one of the few who might beat him. Their clashes became legendary in underworld circles, whispered about in cantinas, where hunters liked to bet on who would come out alive next time. There's a story of a duel between the two that left both scarred. Fett's helmet still carried the mark from that fight, and Bane walked away nursing wounds that reminded him he wasn't untouchable anymore. It wasn't the end, though. It was a reminder that time was catching up. Younger, hungrier bounty hunters were stepping into the trade, and while none had the sheer gall of Bane in his prime, they had quicker reflexes, newer tech, and fewer years weighing them down. Still, Cad Bane didn't retire. If anything, the pressure of being hunted by his own legacy seemed to fuel him. He took contracts that others turned down. He fought jobs that should have killed him outright. It was as if he was daring the galaxy to prove it could take him down. He survived brushes with Jedi remnants, clashed with rebels, and continued to haunt syndicate dealings across the Outer Rim. But there's a difference between surviving and thriving. By the later years, his reputation wasn't as sharp as it had once been. People still feared him, and in a profession where speed means everything, perception alone could be fatal. A younger hunter didn't need to outdraw him. They only needed to believe he was weaker. That's when challenges started to pile up. His story finally came to its end when his path collided again with Boba Fett. The two had always been bound by that invisible thread. Mentor, rival, mirror. It was out in the dust, on a world that fit them both. Simple, harsh, and empty. Cad Bane still had his speed. He still had the confidence. In those last moments, he believed he could put the younger Fett down. And maybe, if things had gone slightly different, he would have. But time favours the bold and the unbroken, and Boba carried the edge of youth and sheer determination. When the dust cleared, it was Bane lying in the sand. It's fitting in a way. Cad Bane didn't fade into obscurity. He went out in the same style he lived, blasters drawn, face to face with a rival who had become the new standard for bounty hunters. If you asked hunters later about his death, some would shrug, saying that's what happens to all of them. Others would admit he set the bar so high that only someone like Boba Fett could close his chapter. And so, Cad Bane's legacy lingers. His reputation remains one of the most colourful in the galaxy's underworld, his tactics studied by younger hunters, his style copied by those who wish they could carry that same aura of danger. Even in death, the idea of him lingers. The cold, calculating Duros, who never flinched, never doubted, and lived longer than anyone expected. If Cad Bane was the slick gunslinger of the Clone Wars, then Bossk was the raw muscle of the bounty hunting world. Bossk was the kind of hunter who walked in, everyone saw the claws, the teeth, the scales, and suddenly they remembered they had somewhere else to be. Intimidation was half his paycheck, and he knew it. To understand Bossk, you have to understand Trandoshan culture. Trandoshans were hunters down to their bones. Their entire society revolved around the hunt. They didn't measure status by wealth, not really. They measured it by kills. Each successful hunt earned a Trandoshan what they called Jaganath points, a spiritual tally that determined their standing with their god, the scorekeeper. The bigger the prey, the more points you earned. And there was no bigger prey in the galaxy, as far as Trandoshans were concerned, than Wookiees. That's why Bossk made his name hunting Wookiees. Kashyyyk wasn't a forest world to him. It was a sacred hunting ground. Wookiees weren't only strong and resourceful, they were the kind of challenge that made the scorekeeper smile. Capturing one alive or dragging back a pelt meant prestige among his people. Bossk leaned into that. He didn't care about the moral outrage from outsiders. For him, every Wookiee hunt was more than a payday. It was a religious experience. This obsession gave him a reputation that spread far beyond Trandoshan borders. Smugglers, syndicates, and imperial officers all knew Bossk was the one to call if you needed someone tracked down, especially if that someone could fight back. His sense of smell was legendary, his patience on a hunt unmatched. Trandoshans could stalk prey for days, and Bossk had that in spades. Where some hunters relied on technology, Bossk relied on instinct. If he caught your scent, you weren't sleeping that night. The Clone Wars provided opportunities, and Bossk took them. Jedi or clone troopers didn't intimidate him. If anything, the bigger the challenge, the better the points. He even ended up mentoring a young Boba Fett for a time, teaching him some of the practical sides of the trade. For all of Bossk's savagery, he wasn't stupid. He understood the value of alliances, at least until they stopped being useful. The galaxy at large often underestimated Trandoshans as simple brutes, but Bossk proved otherwise. He was cunning, patient, and knew how to work a job. Still, his methods were far from delicate. He preferred overwhelming force, blasters, claws, teeth, grenades if the job really needed a loud finish. You wouldn't hire him for a quiet infiltration. You hired Bossk when you wanted someone terrified into submission, or when you needed to send a very bloody message. His reputation for hunting Wookiees made him infamous in the underworld. On Kashyyyk, his name was cursed. In the Outer Rim, it was respected. For Imperials, he was a tool. For criminals, a threat. And for other bounty hunters, he was both a rival and occasionally an ally. When Darth Vader summoned a lineup of the galaxy's best hunters aboard the Executor, Bossk stood right there among them. That image alone tells you how high his reputation had climbed. Another thing that made him feared was his physiology. Trandoshans could regenerate limbs over time, which meant Bossk could survive injuries that would cripple others. He wasn't immortal, but he was durable, and he fought like someone who knew it. Combine that with a natural reptilian resilience, and you had a hunter who could take a beating, keep coming, and then finish the fight with his claws around your throat. Bosk's personality matched his methods. He spoke in a rough growl, always carrying the sense that conversation was one wrong word away from violence. That didn't mean he was mindless. He could negotiate, scheme, and cut deals when needed. But he was always more comfortable on the hunt than in the marketplace. Some hunters played the long game with credits, ships, and syndicate politics. Bossk measured his success in trophies and points. What's funny is that, for all his menace, Bossk wasn't completely antisocial. He worked with crews often, sometimes alongside Aurra Sing, sometimes with Boba Fett and other hunters. He wasn't above teamwork when it suited him, and in those moments, he revealed a practical side. Survival mattered more than pride. If a crew meant higher odds of success, Bossk signed on. But make no mistake, when the credits were divided, he always took his share, and woe to the fool who tried to cheat him. Over time, his reputation grew beyond Wookiee pelts. He became one of those names you dropped when you wanted to make someone nervous. Bossk is coming for you. It was a death sentence. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, he was firmly established as one of the galaxy's elite hunters, feared by smugglers, rebels, and rival hunters alike. If you want to understand why Mandalorians became such a familiar sight in the bounty hunting world, you first need to step back and see the storm that swept across their culture. Mandalorians were never only a warrior people in the sense of chasing battles for glory. Their identity was built on survival, legacy, and loyalty to their creed. But the galaxy around them changed, and their ways of life came under pressure from both outside forces and their own internal divisions. By the time we meet most Mandalorian bounty hunters in Star Wars stories, they are no longer united clans with vast armies. They are survivors scattered across the galaxy, each wearing fragments of what their people used to be. And that shift didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a long string of crises, wars, and eventually the devastating Purge. For centuries, Mandalorians clashed with the Jedi and the Republic. Their warrior traditions put them at odds with anyone who tried to limit their expansion. Entire wars were fought, with Mandalore's surface left scarred and barren by the devastation. Mandalore itself became inhospitable after so many battles, forcing the people to adapt and build enclosed, domed cities. That adaptation showed their resilience, but it also signaled that their culture was being cornered. The once proud empire of warriors was reduced to defending pieces of land they could barely sustain. Internal conflict only made things worse. Some Mandalorians wanted to hold on to the warrior ways that defined them. Others, like Duchess Satine Kryze during the Clone Wars, believed Mandalore had to abandon constant warfare and embrace peace to survive. This sparked a cultural civil war that split the clans. On one side were the pacifists, who believed Mandalore should join the larger galactic community as a peaceful society. On the other were groups like Death Watch, who viewed that as a betrayal of Mandalorian heritage. These fractures weakened Mandalore more than any outside invasion could. A people divided was easier to exploit, and that's exactly what happened. During the Clone Wars, Mandalore became a chessboard for larger galactic powers. Death Watch allied themselves with Darth Maul, bringing him into their struggle for dominance. That alliance eventually let Maul overthrow Satine and seize control of Mandalore through manipulation and force. Suddenly the Mandalorians weren't fighting themselves. They were pawns in a Sith's larger game. Maul's control didn't last forever, but the damage was done. By the time the Republic transformed into the Galactic Empire, Mandalore was politically unstable, militarily fractured, and vulnerable. The Empire took advantage of this. For Palpatine, Mandalorians were dangerous. They weren't the kind of people the Empire could simply rule with propaganda or governors. They had to be crushed. And so began what is often referred to as the Purge of Mandalore. Imperial forces targeted Mandalorian strongholds, seized their Beskar, one of the most valuable resources in the galaxy, and broke the clans apart. The so-called Night of 1,000 Tears became a symbol of that destruction. Imperial bombers rained fire on Mandalorian cities, glassing the surface and reducing what little life remained on the planet to rubble. Survivors were hunted, their culture scattered. Those who lived often had no choice but to flee into exile. This is where the transition into bounty hunting begins to make sense. Mandalorians lost their home, their armies, and their power structure. What they still had was their armor, their creed, and their combat skills. But without a society to sustain them, they had to find new ways to survive. Many clans dissolved into small covert groups, hiding from Imperial eyes, clinging to the old ways in secret. To make a living in such circumstances, mercenary work became one of the few paths available. Bounty hunting was practical, it paid well, it made use of their skills, and it allowed them to remain independent while staying armed and armoured. The galaxy also came to recognise Mandalorians as some of the best bounty hunters one could hire. Their Beskar armour alone gave them an edge over ordinary mercenaries, capable of deflecting blaster bolts and even withstanding lightsaber strikes. Add to that their training in tactics, jetpacks, and an arsenal of gadgets, and a Mandalorian bounty hunter was a walking symbol of fear and respect. People might not have understood the full depth of their cultural loss, but they saw the intimidating silhouette of the T-shaped visor and knew what it meant. This was not a foe you wanted to cross. Mandalorians who had once fought for clan and culture were now forced to fight for scraps. Their conflicts with the Jedi, their civil wars, their entanglement with Sith Lords, and finally the crushing weight of Imperial oppression had left them adrift. They lived scattered across the Outer Rim, in hiding or under false names, taking jobs as mercenaries or bounty hunters just to keep going. The irony is that their skills kept their legacy alive, but only in fragments. The helmet and armour were reminders of what had been lost. Every bounty hunter who wore them carried both the pride of their warrior ancestry and the weight of exile. Some refused to remove their helmets, keeping to ancient codes, not out of pride, but because their identity had been stolen from them and the mask was all they had left. This was the world Din Djarin, known simply as Mando, grew up in. He wasn't born on Mandalore itself. Like many children taken in by the tribes, he was found during war. His parents were killed in a separatist attack, and Death Watch, the militant Mandalorian group, rescued him. From that moment on, he was raised under the creed, taught to live as a Mandalorian, even though he was not born one. For Din, exile wasn't something he experienced after losing Mandalore. It was the only life he ever knew. He grew up in hiding, living with the remnants of a shattered culture. Every mission, every coin purse he collected was a step toward keeping himself and his coverts supplied with the basics of survival. Unlike soldiers tied to a state, or mercenaries tied to a company, bounty hunters had freedom, though it came at the cost of stability. Din Djarin's life perfectly illustrates this existence. To outsiders, he was simply the Mandalorian, a faceless warrior who spoke little and worked hard. He hunted fugitives, debt dodgers, and criminals, moving from system to system, with nothing but his ship and his creed. His Beskar armor was his link to his people, the one reminder that Mandalorians still endured, even if hidden in the shadows of the galaxy. But living this way was never simple. Taking jobs meant relying on guilds and their codes of conduct. Din worked under Grief Karga, following contracts that sometimes blurred the line between justice and cruelty. A target was a target. It didn't matter if they were guilty of some crime or simply unlucky enough to cross the wrong person. Payment was what kept his ship fueled and his covert hidden. This constant moral grey area weighed on him more than he liked to admit, but survival left little room for questions. The true conflict came when Din accepted a contract unlike any other, tracking down a mysterious asset for Imperial remnants. On the surface, it was just another job. The reward was extraordinary, nearly enough to rebuild a small Mandalorian armory, but the asset turned out to be Grogu, the child who would change everything. This was the moment when the Mandalorian life of exile shifted from survival to something greater. The bounty hunter creed clashed with his adopted Mandalorian creed. One demanded he hand the child over, no questions asked. The other whispered that a foundling was to be protected as one of their own. This choice reflected the broader crisis Mandalorians faced after the Purge. For decades, they lived as hired guns, doing what they must to survive. Yet survival alone could not sustain a people forever. Without a homeworld, without unity, and without a future generation to carry the culture forward, Mandalorian identity risked being lost in the endless cycle of contracts and coin. Din's decision to protect Grogu instead of abandoning him, it was a reflection of what remained of Mandalorian honor. Life in exile meant constant travel, constant danger, and the endless search for meaning. Din's ship, the Razor Crest, became more of a home than any planet could be. Jobs took him to desert worlds, frozen wastes, and lawless outposts, but he never stayed in one place long. Even among other bounty hunters, he remained an outsider. His silence, his adherence to the way, and his refusal to remove his helmet made him a mystery. Many saw him as cold or distant, when in truth he carried the burden of an entire culture's survival on his shoulders. Din's story shows what it truly meant for Mandalorians to live as bounty hunters after the Purge. The creed was their compass, the armor their shield, and the hunt their only trade. For Din, this path eventually led him to something greater, the possibility of rebuilding what was lost. But for countless other Mandalorians, life in exile remained nothing more than a cycle of contracts, violence, and the faint hope of one day reclaiming their place in the galaxy. The Clone Wars brought together a strange mix of bounty hunters, mercenaries, and freelancers who operated on the fringes of the galaxy. If you peel back the layers of that era, you find names like Embo, Latts Razzi, and Sugi. Hunters who didn't just take jobs for money, but often got swept up in the bigger struggles of the galaxy. Let's start with Embo. If Cad Bane was the gunslinger, Embo was the silent warrior. A Cuso with a towering presence, he was one of those hunters who didn't need to say much to be remembered. His trademark was that massive circular hat, something that was as much a weapon as it was a shield. In combat, Embo could throw it like a deadly disc, or use it to deflect blaster bolts. Combine that with his bowcaster, and you had a hunter who was versatile, fast, and terrifyingly precise. Unlike some of his peers, Embo often worked in teams, and he had a sense of loyalty that wasn't common in the guild. You could almost say he leaned more toward the mercenary side than the cold-blooded killer archetype. He fought alongside Jedi at times, even defended villages. For Embo, a contract was a contract, and once he gave his word, he followed through. That kind of reliability made him one of the most respected bounty hunters during the war. Then there's Latts Razzi. If Embo was quiet strength, Latts was flair. Her signature fighting style involved using long, flexible restraining chains to entangle opponents, disarm them, or slam them into submission. In a galaxy filled with blasters and lightsabers, seeing someone fight with chains was memorable, to say the least. She had a business-minded streak and often worked with teams of hunters, making her a familiar face in the underworld social circles. She popped up in Cad Bane's company more than once, and while she wasn't as notorious as him, she held her own. The guild needed hunters like Latts, people who could adapt, fill roles in a team, and survive the chaos of Clone Wars era contracts. And then we have Sugi. She stands out because she wasn't driven by greed alone. A Zabrak bounty hunter, Sugi is one of the few in this profession who actually cared about the innocent. That might sound strange in the world of hired guns, but Sugi had her own moral code. She often took contracts that involved protecting villages or escorting supply runs. One of the most famous examples was her work on Felucia, where she and her crew defended farmers from Hondo Ohnaka's pirate gang. She genuinely believed in protecting those who couldn't defend themselves. That gave her a reputation very different from most hunters, less feared, but more trusted. In fact, her role in those conflicts shows that not every bounty hunter was purely self-serving. Some, like Sugi, blurred the line between mercenary and hero. Together, these three, Embo, Latts Razzi, and Sugi, show how wide the spectrum of bounty hunters really was during the Clone Wars. They weren't all cut from the same cloth. Some leaned toward honor, some toward money, some toward pure survival. The Jedi, who were stretched thin across the war, often found themselves either clashing with or relying on these figures. That was the strange paradox of the era. Bounty hunters could be enemies one week and allies the next. What makes their stories interesting is how they highlight the survival strategies of bounty hunters in wartime. The Clone Wars created opportunities, but also massive risks. Planets were constantly changing hands, governments rose and fell overnight, and allegiances were slippery at best. If you were a bounty hunter, you had to decide, do you work for the Separatists, for the Republic, or do you stay independent, picking up jobs where you can and trying not to get crushed in the middle of the galactic conflict? Hunters like Embo, Latts, and Sugi usually chose the third option. They weren't loyal to governments or ideologies. They were loyal to their crew, their code, and the promise of payment. But in choosing that, they often shaped events in subtle ways. Sugi's protection of villages meant that pirate gangs couldn't spread unchecked. Embo's reputation for honor meant people sought him out for contracts where reliability was crucial. Latts brought creativity and unpredictability to teams that would have been otherwise straightforward. 4LOM wasn't born a killer. He started as a droid, an unremarkable protocol unit designed to assist with translations and etiquette. But droids can evolve, and when a chance encounter with the criminal underworld came along, 4LOM seized it. Something about the chaos of the galaxy suited him better than polite conversation. After being reprogrammed and upgraded, he became a full-fledged hunter. He could plan a hit months in advance, anticipate variables that others overlooked, and execute operations with an almost robotic precision, which in his case was literal. In a profession often dictated by impulse and bravado, that was an advantage most hunters didn't expect to face. Zuckuss, on the other hand, was all instinct. A Gand trained in the ways of the Force-sensitive, spiritualist trackers of his species, he could read energy traces in ways few others could. He wasn't a Jedi, but the Force subtly influenced his tracking, allowing him to follow targets through complex urban environments or harsh wilderness with uncanny efficiency. While his appearance, a thin, almost skeletal figure in a long cloak with goggles that hid his eyes, might have seemed weak or odd to the untrained observer, every step, every movement was deliberate. Zuckuss embodied patience and silence, a hunter who would wait for hours or even days if the contract required it. Together, they were complementary in ways that made them formidable. 4LOM supplied the methodical, calculating edge. Zuckuss provided intuition and force-assisted tracking that often tipped the scales in tight hunts. In a universe full of bounty hunters relying on blasters, jetpacks, and intimidation, this combination was almost unseen. Droid efficiency fused with alien instinct. They could operate in places where traditional methods would fail: dense cityscapes, remote jungles, or even asteroid fields. Their teamwork was subtle, rarely noticeable to others, until it was too late. Their hits were clean, effective, and often gone before anyone realized they had been there. Unlike some of their peers, they rarely took contracts for prestige. They didn't need to prove themselves to the guild or intimidate rivals with flamboyant tactics. For them, bounty hunting was a job, a contract to complete. They worked for credits, yes, but also for the challenge. A difficult hunt was a puzzle to be solved. Their reputation was quiet, but respected in underworld circles. Their existence also highlights a different corner of the guild that's often overlooked. Most bounty hunters rely on brute force, weapons, and reputation to command attention. But there's a niche for those who excel in intelligence gathering, tracking, and strategy. The guild accommodated such diversity because contracts varied wildly. Some clients wanted a high-profile arrest, others needed stealth, discretion, or careful extraction. The guild attracted those who could find a way to survive outside the law, some through intimidation, some through speed, some through cunning, and some through patience and calculation. The diversity of its members is part of what made it durable, even as empires rose and fell around them. Every contract they completed reinforced that a bounty hunter's strength isn't only in firepower or legend. It can also be in adaptability, intellect, and persistence. Their quiet efficiency made them perfect examples of how the guild's reach extended into the strangest corners of the galaxy. The life of a bounty hunter is chaotic, unpredictable, and often violent, but within that chaos, there is an underlying structure, a code that governs how hunters operate. It isn't written in a law book or enforced by the Republic or the Empire. Instead, it's a set of norms, traditions, and expectations upheld primarily by the guild. If you want to survive in the galaxy as a bounty hunter, understanding this code is as important as knowing how to shoot, track, or survive on hostile worlds. Breaking it could mean losing contracts, allies, or even your life. Following it could earn you respect, protection, and a reputation that precedes you wherever you go. At the heart of the code is honor among hunters. It's not the honor of knights or the moral compass of Jedi. This honor is pragmatic, a system of mutual expectations designed to keep the profession viable. If a hunter takes a contract, others know that interfering with it, stealing it, or sabotaging the hunt could bring swift retribution. The guild has ways of making sure hunters play fair, or at least don't make enemies they can't handle. Honor also ties to the way you treat your target. There are unwritten rules about unnecessary cruelty, letting certain contracts go if the stakes are political rather than financial, and the general expectation that a professional will follow through on what they accept. Reputation is the currency of this world. Unlike credits, you can't spend it, but it can open doors or close them. A well-known hunter with a reputation for efficiency and discretion gets more lucrative jobs. Clients feel secure hiring someone whose name is whispered in the underworld with respect. Rival hunters also consider reputation when choosing whom to partner with or whom to challenge. A hunter who cheats, fails, or acts dishonorably risks not only losing the contract at hand, but also being blacklisted from future opportunities. In many cases, this could be fatal. Survival often depends on trust, even among strangers in the Outer Rim. The guild itself exists to manage these expectations. It functions as both a marketplace and a court. It ensures contracts are legitimate, collects fees, and mediates disputes. When two hunters have a conflict over a contract, the guild can step in to arbitrate. If a hunter breaks the rules, the guild can issue warnings, fines, or expulsion. Expulsion is severe. Without guild affiliation, a hunter loses access to official contracts and protection, essentially marking them as fair game to rivals. This governance creates a fragile balance. The galaxy may have no law protecting bounty hunters, but within the guild, there's a kind of regulated chaos. Rules extend to the nature of the contracts themselves. There are expectations about bounty collection, reporting, and even treatment of witnesses. Certain types of contracts, like high-profile targets or politically sensitive bounties, come with additional oversight. Hunters are expected to respect the client's wishes and adhere to specific conditions or risk penalties. The code doesn't interfere with tactics, weapon choice, or strategy, but it does establish boundaries for acceptable behavior. These boundaries are often flexible, especially in the Outer Rim or distant systems where the guild's reach is limited. Yet, even there, hunters know that breaking too many rules can make them a target for rivals or guild enforcers. The enforcement of the code isn't always formal. Reputation and fear play a huge role. Stories of hunters who crossed the line spread quickly through cantinas, spaceports, and guild channels. Other hunters know to avoid them, or in some cases exact private vengeance. Guild-sanctioned bounty enforcement, or disciplinary hunts, sometimes occurs when someone has blatantly violated contracts. A hunter who attacks others' jobs, abandons clients, or cheats can find themselves being hunted by a team of enforcers. This keeps hunters accountable, and it reinforces the principle that the code is there for everyone's survival, not just a suggestion. Honor, reputation, and guild enforcement all work together to create a fragile ecosystem in which bounty hunters can operate. It's not perfect. Some hunters cheat, some clients are dishonest, some jobs lead to blood feuds, betrayals, or deaths. But overall, the system maintains order in a profession defined by danger and uncertainty. Hunters like Boba Fett, Cad Bane, and even Embo or Sugi understand this deeply. Their success depends as much on their adherence to or mastery of the code as on their skill with blasters, ships, or tracking devices. Following the code doesn't make the life of a bounty hunter easy, but it makes it sustainable. And in this profession, sustainability is worth more than heroics, glory, or ego. One of the things that sets bounty hunting apart from other professions in the galaxy is how fluid the moral landscape is. There are no clear lines, bright rules about right and wrong. Every hunter learns early that a target might be a wanted criminal, a political pawn, or even someone completely innocent who happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yet the job must be done. That's the reality of the trade. For some hunters, this moral ambiguity is a practical problem. For others, it becomes part of the philosophy of survival. Take a bounty on a Jedi, for example. Jedi are powerful, resourceful, and sometimes dangerous to the galaxy, but they are also figures of respect to many. A hunter accepting such a contract has to weigh the risk. Can they complete the task? Will failure cost them their life? Will completing it mark them as a target to others who might seek revenge? Beyond the immediate dangers, there's also the question of reputation. Killing a Jedi is a statement, one that carries weight throughout the guild and underworld. It may earn respect or fear, or it may draw the ire of everyone connected to the Force. Then there are targets who are simply criminals. Smugglers, pirates, gang leaders. These are the bread and butter jobs, the contracts that keep credits flowing and ships fueled. They're simpler in one sense. There's less moral debate, fewer consequences outside the hunt itself. But even these jobs are not without complexity. Sometimes these criminals have family, allies, or innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. Hunters quickly learn that collateral damage is rarely rewarded, and carelessness can make a contract more dangerous than anticipated. Each hunt is a balance between efficiency, caution, and survival. And then there are the morally grey cases, targets who may be innocent or whose guilt is ambiguous. The Outer Rim is full of these situations where local law is murky, corruption is rampant, and contracts are handed out by the highest bidder rather than by justice. A hunter might be hired to bring someone in who hasn't actually committed a crime, simply because they're inconvenient or because someone else wants them removed. The guild doesn't judge these situations. It only cares that the hunter completes the job according to the contract. For the individual hunter, that means navigating the tension between survival and conscience. This tension shapes the character of hunters in unique ways. Some, like Cad Bane, embrace the moral flexibility entirely, seeing every contract as a means to an end, with no thought to the consequences for the innocent. Others, like Sugi or Djarin in his later career, maintain personal lines they won't cross. The choice is always personal, because the guild doesn't dictate morality. It only regulates behaviour and enforces the professional standards of bounty hunting. A hunter's reputation may depend on the perception of fairness, but it doesn't demand ethical perfection. Part of the blurred morality also comes from the nature of the galaxy itself. Wars, political upheavals, and criminal syndicates create situations where morality is a luxury. A hunter may be hired to capture someone considered a hero by one faction and a villain by another. Survival often requires the ability to see past personal judgment and act in a way that ensures continued contracts and protection. Flexibility and pragmatism become essential tools, just as vital as blasters or tracking devices. Despite the ambiguity, some code remains. Killing a target outright when it isn't specified or betraying a fellow hunter is generally punished. But beyond these narrow rules, the profession encourages hunters to make their own decisions. That's why bounty hunting can be both liberating and isolating. You answer to no government, no army, and no council of ethics, only to the contract and to yourself. Every decision carries weight, and the consequences, moral or otherwise, are yours to bear. Even within this grey area, hunters develop strategies to manage risk. Some take contracts selectively, avoiding morally dubious jobs when possible. Others develop reputations for ruthlessness, which discourages interference from rivals or clients who might try to cheat them. These variations highlight the diversity of approaches in a profession that leaves room for skill, cunning, and judgment, but almost no room for certainty. Every profession has its limits, and bounty hunting is unforgiving. Hunters live fast, travel hard, and rely on reflexes and skill that, over time, inevitably start to wane. The galaxy is vast, but it is also relentless. Every mark taken, every ship piloted, every firefight survived leaves marks on both body and reputation. Aging is the first invisible enemy. Your vision may blur, your reflexes slow, and even simple calculations can take longer than they once did. For a bounty hunter, every fraction of a second matters. A small decline can mean failure or death. Injuries add to this burden. Even the most cautious hunters collect scars, burns from blasters, deep cuts from vibroblades, or worse, missing limbs replaced by cybernetics. These replacements may restore function, but they rarely restore the feeling of being whole. A cybernetic arm may fire as fast as the original, but it lacks subtlety. Pain may fade, but fatigue and mechanical limitations remain. Hunters learn to adapt, but adaptation has its cost. Every prosthetic, every augmentation, is a reminder of a past confrontation where survival required sacrifice. There comes a point when the galaxy no longer bends around your experience and reputation. The younger generation has grown faster, stronger, and more adaptable, and they see the legends of the past as challenges to be surpassed. They study your methods, learn your routes, and watch your moves with the kind of patience that only youth and ambition can fuel. Where you once held the advantage of reputation and fear, now they exploit gaps in your reflexes, your assumptions, and even your pride. Systems you once dominated become hunting grounds for newer, hungrier hunters who bring with them the latest weapons, technology, and daring tactics. They are relentless and unafraid. Some are reckless, yes, but many have refined skill that surpasses yours in precision and speed. Every encounter is a reminder that time has a price, and in the world of bounty hunting, that price is unforgiving. Betrayal and shifting alliances also intensify during this phase. Younger hunters are not only competitors but potential opportunists. They study the patterns of the older guard, waiting for signs of weakness, for moments when the hunter's age or fatigue leaves them vulnerable. Even former colleagues or partners may see an opportunity to advance by stepping over you. The underworld, which once respected a seasoned name, now evaluates hunters by immediate effectiveness. Past glories carry less weight when a newer, more efficient hunter steps onto the scene. Psychologically, this stage can be as challenging as the physical toll of aging. Hunters who once felt invincible are forced to confront mortality, the inevitability of decline, and the realization that their era is ending. Every missed shot, every delayed maneuver, every intercepted contract underscores the passing of time. Pride and ego clash with pragmatism. Some hunters accept it gracefully, adjusting their operations and strategy, while others resist, clinging to old ways until the galaxy reminds them in harsher terms that they can no longer dominate. The endgame is a complex negotiation between survival, reputation, and legacy. Some hunters transition into advisory roles or mentorship, passing on skills while withdrawing from the front lines. Others continue hunting, adapting their strategies to survive and stay relevant, even as the end approaches. A few make one final stand, a risky, high-profile hunt that serves as both a test and a statement, a way to demonstrate that they are not yet obsolete. The outcome may be survival, injury, or death, but it is always a defining moment. This stage of a bounty hunter's life is defined by the tension between experience and youth, between accumulated skill and fresh energy. The world moves forward, and with it comes the new generation, relentless in ambition and unafraid of the legends who came before. The seasoned hunter must navigate these challenges with wisdom, adaptability, and a measure of humility, understanding that the end is inevitable, but the manner of its approach is still within their control. Survival may depend not only on reflexes or firepower, but on the ability to accept change, to read the landscape, and to recognize that legacy is leaving a mark that others remember when the hunter is gone. The galaxy continues, younger hunters rise, and the cycle of bounty hunting persists, ever hungry for those willing to chase its elusive rewards. The lifestyle of a retired hunter is surprisingly varied. Some retreat to isolated worlds, establishing quiet lives where no one knows their past. Others invest in trade or small enterprises, using the credits they earned to build a comfortable existence. A few remain close to the guild, offering consultancy or taking on selective contracts that suit them. But even in retirement, the hunter's instincts rarely fade entirely. They are aware of danger, cautious around strangers, and attuned to threats that the average person would never notice. Survival skills are lifelong habits. The decision to retire is also deeply personal. For many, the thrill of the hunt and the freedom of a life untethered to government or law is addictive. Some hunters delay retirement, chasing one last big contract, only to find that their reflexes and strength are no longer sufficient. Those who plan well, however, recognize the value in leaving the field while they still have control, leaving their legacy intact rather than risking decline and failure. Retirement also allows for reflection. The hunter can consider the long career, the allies gained, enemies made, and the countless marks pursued across the galaxy. They understand the fine balance between survival and ambition, and they often take satisfaction in the lessons learned rather than the wealth earned alone. This perspective is rare because most hunters never have the luxury of time. They're always chasing, always on the move, and always aware that one mistake could be fatal. Yet even the rare few who retire comfortably are exceptions. The galaxy is unforgiving, and bounty hunting is inherently dangerous. Many hunters who dream of walking away rich never reach that point. Injuries, betrayals, and bad luck cut careers short. Some retire financially secure, but remain haunted by past choices, while others are forced out by rivals or shifting political landscapes. Success in retirement requires more than skill. It demands foresight, discipline, and a measure of luck that is rarely accounted for in the planning of a life on the hunt. These stories, however, fuel the myths and dreams of younger hunters. They provide hope that a life beyond contracts and constant danger is possible. They show that the profession, while brutal and demanding, offers opportunities not only for wealth, but for autonomy, self-determination, and legacy. The retired hunters who succeed are often remembered not only for their hunts, but for the fact that they managed to step away on their own terms, a rare feat in a galaxy that rarely gives second chances. Some hunters, like Jango Fett, meet their end at the hands of powerful adversaries. Jango's death was a culmination of politics, Jedi intervention, and the dangers inherent in taking contracts with high-profile targets. His demise demonstrates a truth in bounty hunting. No matter skill or reputation, there are forces in the galaxy that cannot be overcome by cunning alone. Yet Jango's story did not vanish with his death. His legacy lived on, primarily through Boba Fett, whose survival and rise would carry Jango's reputation forward, shaping the galaxy in ways he could never have achieved in life. Boba Fett's trajectory is another example of this duality between mortality and legacy. Escaping death from the Sarlacc pit, he transformed from a near mythical figure, presumed lost to a legend, whose name inspired fear, respect, and caution. His story underscores a critical aspect of bounty hunting. Survival is important, but reputation and legend can be just as influential. A hunter's deeds, whether in life or posthumously, echo through the guild and the galaxy, defining them as much as the contracts they completed. For every Jango or Boba, however, there are countless others whose deaths go unnoticed. The galaxy swallows them quietly, marking systems with the memory of their hunts but rarely their names. They are warnings and lessons for others, reminders that skill, while essential, is not sufficient to guarantee survival. The line between success and failure is razor thin, and even minor miscalculations can have fatal consequences. In a profession where trust is limited and alliances are fragile, every encounter carries the weight of risk, and every death reinforces the precariousness of life on the hunt. Legacy, therefore, becomes a form of immortality. Bounty hunters are often remembered for the contracts they completed, the methods they employed, and the fear or respect they inspired. Stories spread through cantinas, guild halls, and criminal networks. A hunter's name can command obedience or inspire trepidation long after they are gone. In this sense, death does not necessarily end influence. The impact of a hunter's career may resonate across decades, affecting younger hunters, the guild, and even galactic politics. So, that's it for this video. You've travelled the galaxy through the eyes of bounty hunters, from their first steps into the trade to the legends that some become, and the dangers that always lurk around the next corner. We've seen the beginnings, the weapons, the ships, the rivalries, and the guilds that shape their lives. We've followed hunters like Jango and Boba Fett, Cad Bane and Bossk, and explored what it means to live, survive, and sometimes die in a profession where every decision carries weight. It's a life of calculation, patience, and constant adaptation. It's a life where every hunt tests not only skill, but judgment, where reputation can protect you or make you a target. Some hunters walk away, rare and lucky, with enough credits and foresight to retire. Most do not. Most carry scars, stories, and memories that follow them from system to system, marking a career that is as dangerous as it is fascinating. And yet that's part of what makes their story so compelling. The galaxy is unpredictable. Alliances shift, enemies rise, and the line between morality and survival blurs. Every hunter has faced choices that could have meant life or death, fame or obscurity, respect or infamy. And in the end, their legacy isn't measured in how long they lived, but in the stories they leave behind, the ones that other hunters, guild members, and even the occasional civilian remember long after the contracts are completed. So whether you imagine yourself in the armor of a Mandalorian, relying on gadgets and ships, or sneaking through the shadows like a cunning rogue, the life of a bounty hunter is a lesson in adaptation, resilience, and consequence. It's a profession without guarantees, where every step forward can bring success or peril, and every choice carries weight. But for those who embrace it, the galaxy opens up in a way few other lives could offer. Thank you for staying with me on this journey. I hope it gave you a sense of what it's really like to live as one of the galaxy's most dangerous and fascinating professions.